That's my problem.
It's the Gold Coast.
Too many wagons.
I'm back to my checkpoint next.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei, future nurses at breaking point before they even get on the job proper. Tonight, the dropout rates, juggling long unpaid hospital placements and study too. Calculators out, Auckland councillors go searching for $270 million to plug a budget blowout. The Super City CEO is live. A call for an overstayer amnesty to help fill stubborn worker shortages. Only 40% of school students regularly turned up to class in term 2. So what's a legit reason to keep your child home? And the alleged dumpster diving dust up, and what happens with waste fashion?
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Evie Ashton. The National Party leader is open to fining parents who fail to get their kids to school. An Education Ministry report released today shows just 40% of children went to school regularly in term 2 this year. In the UK, parents can be fined for taking their children on holiday during term time without their school's permission. Christopher Luxon says if elected, his party would consider all options to boost attendance.
Well, we're at a stage now when you have 40% of your kids only going to school regularly, 60% not making regular attendance. We need to consider absolutely anything and everything in order to get parents to face up to their responsibility, which is to get their kids to school.
Luxon says schools and the government also have a responsibility to ensure kids get to class. Third-year student nurses at AUT feel taken advantage of as they work towards getting their qualifications. Nursing students have told RNZ they feel like they're used for free labour in an industry facing major shortages. One student says some content in the course is self-directed learning, which often means watching a YouTube video, and they feel unprepared for clinical placements. AUT says there's considerable support available to students while on placement, and student health is taken seriously by the university. You can hear more about this on Checkpoint shortly. Police are responding to an incident at a commercial property on a busy street in the centre of Rotorua. Photos from the scene, reported by staff, show police surrounding a BNZ building on Amoho Street. There are no reports of anybody being injured. Police say information will be provided as soon as it's available. A former reality TV star charged after a police officer was hit by a vehicle in Auckland last night and seriously injured has been granted name suppression to tell his whānau. The man is facing charges of wounding with intent to cause grievous bodily harm, failing to stop a motor vehicle and unlawfully taking a vehicle. He's still in hospital but was remanded without plea to appear in the Manukau District Court on November the 28th. The court was told the man is suffering severe drug and alcohol addictions. The Reserve Bank's chair says there's no need for an independent inquiry into the bank's response to COVID-19. This morning, the central bank published a self-assessment of its actions over the past 5 years. The National Party says the report is not credible and wants an independent review. But Neil Quigley says that's not required.
Personally, I don't see an independent inquiry as being necessary, given that we have provided the level of information that we have here. But of course, if there was to be an independent inquiry in addition to this one, we would cooperate fully and welcome it.
The Reserve Bank's report says its monetary policy decisions were consistent with data at the time, but could have been tightened earlier to counter inflation. In the US, with votes still being counted, Republicans are favourite to win the House of Representatives, but the fight for the Senate is neck and neck. Democrats have gained a key Senate seat in Pennsylvania, but two other contests remain too close to call. The critical Senate race between Democrat Raphael Warnock and Republican challenger Herschel Walker in Georgia is headed to a runoff in 4 weeks, as neither candidate secured more than 50% of the vote. The midterm elections fell short of the sweeping victory Republicans had hoped for. In sport, the return of Charmaine McMenamin to the starting lineup is the only change to the Black Ferns lineup for Saturday's Rugby World Cup final against England at Eden Park. She replaces number 8, Liana Michaela Tu'u, who suffered a thumb injury in the semi-final win over France. Charmaine McMenamin is one of 6 players who were in the 2017 World Cup winning side that beat England. She's come off the bench in 2 World Cup matches this time, having been on the mend from a serious injury. And coach Wayne Smith says to be playing in a World Cup final after what she's been through is impressive.
She's been incredible because I don't think she would have ever dreamed that she would be here. You know, after the spinal operation, just being able to play again, even at club level, was probably a dream. You just got to really be proud of her mental toughness to be able to come back and play at this level and perform well.
And Black Caps captain Kane Williamson will take some time to contemplate his future in all 3 formats of the game. Following the loss to Pakistan in the T20 World Cup semi-final, New Zealand has just a week before their next assignment, a T20 and one-day series here against India. Williamson says he still enjoys playing all 3 formats of the game.
There's a lot of cricket, and so that needs to be managed a little bit, and it's a changing landscape with players all around the world at the moment, and we've seen it in our camp as well. So after these sorts of events, you sort of sit down and give yourself a chance to reflect.
The Black Caps have a busy summer schedule with series against India, Pakistan, England and Sri Lanka. That's the news.
Tonight on RNZ National, tree planting projects the world over aim to help the effects of climate change. But are they always a success? And how far have we come with solar panels? Our changing world explores new materials, hoping to harness the energy of our long hours of sunshine. And musician Steph Animal joins us to talk about Top Gear and the vinyl release of her album recorded with obsolete computer technology. It's all on Nights with me, Karen Hay, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And we're on air on rnz.co.nz and on your mobile through the RNZ app. You're back with Lisa, you're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. For Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, isolated showers turning to rain from late this evening with heavy falls possible. Strong easterly winds developing tonight, easing tomorrow afternoon. From Waikato to Manawatu, including Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country, becoming fine this afternoon. Rain developing tomorrow morning with heavy falls in the Bay of Plenty. Gusty southeasterly winds easing tomorrow. For Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, showers north of Napier but cloudy periods farther south. Rain becoming widespread tomorrow morning, possibly heavy about the ranges. From Hurufenua to Wellington and also for Waded Upper, fine today. Rain developing around midday tomorrow. Marlborough and Canterbury becoming fine this afternoon. Rain spreading south from tomorrow afternoon. Nelson, Buller, Westland and Fiordland, fine today. Rain developing in Nelson and Buller tomorrow afternoon. Otago and Southland, fine but cloudy periods mainly in the east today. And fine weather is forecast for Rekohu, Chatham Islands. The time is coming up to 7 minutes past 5. I'll have news headlines and traffic for you at 20 past 5.
Ngā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint i tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Coming up, a call for an overstayer amnesty to help plug stubborn staff shortages. But first, we begin tonight in Auckland, where just weeks out from finishing their degrees, nursing students have told Checkpoint they are already at breaking point. The third-year AUT students, who have asked not to be named, say they've been put under immense stress, juggling 40-hour-a-week unpaid hospital placements alongside full-time study with no payment or compensation for things like petrol or hospital parking. It comes as the nation faces a desperate shortage of health professionals and the government embarks on a raft of measures to bring more nurses and doctors into the country. Tom Taylor with the nursing students who say they've been taken advantage of.
My honest advice to anyone that was going to embark on a nursing degree would be, no, stay away from it. Don't even consider it. It is not worth it.
With just weeks to go before becoming a registered nurse, Zoe is already burnt out. Although the finish line's in sight, she and other third-year nursing students spoken to by Checkpoint say they have nothing left in the tank.
We are students that should be excited about this new chapter of our life and embarking on, making change and helping people, which is the primary reason you get into this job, and kind of got nothing left to give.
AUT's nursing degree covers everything from human anatomy to mental health science. But Zoe says much of the content has been designated as self-directed learning, which often means watching a YouTube video, a previous year's lecture recording, or flipping through a textbook. She says it makes her feel unprepared for her clinical placements, which make up a crucial part of the degree.
When you walk into a placement where you've kind of taught yourself to the best of your ability how to do certain things, it's A, embarrassing, and B, a completely unsafe practice.
And when she reaches out to AUT for support, she finds none.
We've just been told to basically get on with it, and that's AUT's sort of ethos the entire time. Or if you haven't got the resilience, or you haven't got the ability, or if it's too much for you, this is the wrong industry, you shouldn't be doing it. And if you can't handle it now, you're never going to be able to handle it when you get into the real world.
Fellow AUT student Charlie says the university assigns students to clinical placement with no input from the students themselves. This means a student living in Albany could find themselves on placement in Manurewa, while those from Waitakere end up in Howick. Adding to the extra travel time is the stress of only finding out where they're placed or what type of ward or clinic they'll be in at the very last minute.
You could be doing shift work. Occasionally students doing like night shifts and morning shifts, or just like normal daytime, like 8 till 4. Very often it's like 7 a.m. till 3, or like doing up until 11 p.m. Placement's like a full-time, 40 hours a week expectation that you do.
Add to this university assignments and examinations, which don't stop during placements, and the pressure can quickly mount.
I've known a lot of students have kind of broken down because of the stress. I mean, the whole degree has a huge dropout rate. Like, I look at the class sizes now and they've just dwindled down to so little students compared to where we started.
The Nursing Council requires students to complete a minimum of 1,100 clinical hours across the 3-year degree, or almost 10 full weeks of work each year. But the placements are unpaid. In fact, students pay to complete them as part of their more than $8,000 a year university fees. And financial support to cover the cost of uniforms, food, petrol and hospital parking is hard to come by. With an expected salary of about $60,000 a year once she's registered, AUT student Hannah says she wasn't naive about the prospects of working as a nurse in New Zealand. But she says it hasn't helped that any concerns she takes to the university, financial or otherwise, have been met with deaf ears.
It's been really, really rough. There just is no sympathy or support across the board from the school.
When a number of students pushed AUT for more assistance, they say the university told them they'd investigate their suitability for the profession.
It's crazy because it's sort of ingrained in us from the beginning of this degree that how important a holistic approach to health is. You know, like you got to look after yourself before you can look after others. And like, why is that only being applied to the people we're looking after? Like, don't we have to be healthy too?
Chair of the New Zealand Nurses Organisation's student unit, Rebecca Dunn, says a response like this is unacceptable from a university that's supposed to be preparing for a much-needed intake of new nurses.
Every school needs to have mental health support available to their students. They need to have their students adequately prepared for the things that they're going to see when they go out into placement, because a lot of it can be quite traumatic for people.
The Nursing Council sets education standards for registered nurse programs, including the requirement of clinical placement hours. But it says the support offered to students varies between education providers, as does the overall workload imposed on them.
Our reporter Tom Taylor joins us now live in the studio. Tom, you have had a response from AUT, and what are they saying about the students' concerns?
Yeah, so we only had this response about half an hour ago after alerting AUT to the students' concerns on Monday. So just still combing through it, but AUT has said that they take mental health of their students very seriously. They say, yes, they've got a duty of care to their students, but that mental health and wellbeing issues do come at the forefront and won't preclude any students from becoming a nurse eventually.
And what specifically have they got to say about the placements which the students raised as being unpaid?
Yeah, so they're saying that students are advised of their placement allocation by email. Their preference is that that advice may be sent well ahead of time to give students, time to prepare. But they say, unfortunately, due to the complex nature of this thing, where they're working in conjunction with all other universities, nursing students, they say last-minute changes and disappointed students can be unavoidable. An interesting thing to remember throughout all of this is that these placements are unpaid. AUT does say there's some discussion being had around this, but one of the big questions is who exactly would pay students, whether that's the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health. The New Zealand Nurses Organisation has also said that they are pushing for clinical placements to be paid. But yeah, just on AUT's placement of students, they say they're unlikely to be located in their neighbourhood of choice. They say that travel to the placement is an expectation, and that's made very clear to students all across the degree. So they say while they do consider a student's location in their preference where possible, that's just not always possible sometimes.
Yeah, so some students end up paying significant travel costs from getting from A to B. Okay, now what about graduates? What numbers has AUT provided about their graduates?
Yeah, so this is quite interesting. They've provided the details of this for the last 3 years of graduates. So the intake in 2017, which would finish 2019 ordinarily, there were 300 students in that intake. Just 160 of them graduated in 2019, so about half are making it to the end point. It was about a third dropped out from 2018 to 2020. And then in the most recent graduates, about half of them again, 497 in the intake and about 250 graduating there. So some concerning figures there, but we'll be hoping to bring more on this tomorrow.
Thank you, Tom. Tom Taylor there with that report. It is 5:15. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. If you are a nursing student, we're keen to hear from you. What's it like out there? 2101. How do you cover your fees and the cost of travelling to these placements? Is it a fair system? If not, why not? You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, and the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And if you're listening in, is it a fair system? We're desperate for nurses. Should we be doing more to cover the costs for the trainees? A call tonight for an overstayer amnesty to help plug stubborn staff shortages. Across the economy, employers are struggling to find workers, with some having to close to give exhausted staff a break. They say workers can afford to be choosy with unemployment still at rock bottom levels. Our reporter Somya Barmedi-Pati looks into the job market crisis.
Staff wanted signs in windows across the country. On Auckland's Karanga Hape Road, a 2-month-old sign in Fort Greene Bakery's window advertises for a baker and a chef. Co-owner Andrea Mulhausen says she's willing to pay well, but those who apply know it's a job seekers market.
Suddenly, no one wants to work the weekends or the harsh, or the afternoons or evening, sort of 9 to 5, Monday to Friday jobs. I'm like, why are you trying to work in hospitality when it's sort of the opposite?
Several times this year, she's had to close completely to give overwhelmed staff a break. In Point Chevalier, Ambler Cafe and Bistro manager Lucy Evans says she's just filled the head and sous chef positions, but still needs a kitchen hand. But she says that could change by next week.
That's the hard thing about it, is you never quite know if you're going to have a staff pack up and leave overseas.
And at Emporium, a variety store in central Whangarei, Nina says she's been looking for someone to cover weekends for 2 years, despite the low skill level required.
For us, the minimum requirement for to work here is very, very simple. I would say just say greetings, and you don't really need experience to do the job, but not many people want to do the job.
Sarah White from Tribe Recruitment says while vacancy rates haven't changed much, the agency's seen far fewer applicants. In particular, she says demand for seasonal staff is up by about 20% from last year.
If I look at our temporary workforce, that's taken a real hit over the last few years, and as a result, there's less people wanting to be a temporary employee compared to what they used to, because the cost of living and inflation's got a lot higher.
Sarah White says employers across the board are finding it's taking about a month longer than normal to fill positions. And it's not just retail and hospitality struggling to find staff. Employers and Manufacturers Association boss Brett O'Reilly says almost every industry has been affected by skill shortages, low unemployment and the ageing workforce.
Certainly in the construction sector, there's a real shortage of highly skilled roles like project management, engineers, quantity surveyors. In the manufacturing sector, we see a shortage of technicians, we see a shortage of auditors, we see a shortage in the health system of nurses and doctors.
The solution? Brett O'Reilly says it's immigration and technology. He says the government could instantly increase the labour force by granting an amnesty to people who've overstayed their visas.
There's 16,000 overstayers in New Zealand who currently can't legally work in New Zealand, so that's a labour force that we could activate. But beyond that, it really is about immigration. Could we have more flexible immigration arrangements for the Pacific Islands? We know that there are people there that are looking for jobs.
Longer term, Brett O'Reilly says the government will need to encourage businesses to invest in technology and training.
What do you reckon? An amnesty for overstayers to get them on the books and into the workforce here and to help fill stubborn job vacancies. What do you think? 2101 on text, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. The email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It's a fail for New Zealand when it comes to school attendance. In Term 2 this year, only 40% of students regularly went to school, and kura, by definition, that's turning up more than 90% of the time. There was a massive spike in COVID cases and winter illnesses during the term, and justified medical absences made up about 8.6% of missing students. But almost 6% of time off school was unjustified. And an Education Review Office report says 40% of parents surveyed were comfortable with their child missing a week or more of classes each term. Founder of the Happy Mum, Happy Child website, Maria Foy, joins us now. Kia ora, Maria.
Kia ora, how are you?
I'm well, thanks. Tell us how it's going in your house. Did the kids go to school today?
I'm cringing a little bit, but they're actually sick at the moment, so no, they didn't.
Would you have any idea how many days your children have had off this year, and what's it been like?
I think it's probably been maybe 3 to 4 weeks this year, usually with an illness, but I'm not averse to giving my children a mental health day, not at all. So,
Tell us about that, Maria. What qualifies as a mental health day? How do you decide?
I basically know my kids best, just like every other parent does. And if my child's had a bad night, then I will assess that in the morning and maybe offer them that day. If I know that there is something coming up that may be quite stressful for them, then I may pull them back. Although I'm a little bit loath to do that because we all like to encourage kids to step outside of their comfort zone. But obviously I know my kids best. And yeah, sometimes they can just come and ask me, Mum, can I have a mental health day today? Because we encourage that in this house. And if I feel like perhaps it's time, absolutely.
Does the school ever hit you up about that?
No, I'm very open and honest with them about that. I haven't had them come to me at all. Yeah, but they're usually few and far between with mental health days, thankfully. It's been more the sickness this year.
3 to 4 weeks is a lot. Are you concerned that they're missing out? And you've got friends who are parents. What are they telling you?
So I'm not worried that my kids are missing out at this stage. They seem to be on track, and I'm always keeping in touch with the teachers. Thankfully, a bit of a blessing with regards to COVID and lockdowns, we now have this really great online system that they can give our kids stuff to do at home, which is amazing. The feelers I've got from other parents out there is they're also in a similar situation with regards to illnesses. I know I've spoken to my GP who's reassured me that there are a lot of bugs going around there at the moment, and kids especially seem to be picking up on them. Another thing is some kids have got a lot of anxiety around COVID and needing to stay at home because of that, because they're worried that they might get sick because there are a lot of bugs at school. And I know many parents who accommodate their children and let that happen.
So about 6% of absences were unjustified according to the information about Term 2. In terms of that, where is your line in the sand? What is an unjustified absence? What's a legit reason to keep your kids home, do you think? Because is wanting cheaper airfares a legit reason if you're going on a family holiday? And I say that in all seriousness, you know?
No,
what do you
absolutely.
reckon?
I mean, I think that family holiday is a really important part of learning and growing. So no, I don't think that's unjustified. I think that during the school holidays, it gets really expensive to do stuff. And if you can take a few days off beforehand and reduce that expense, especially nowadays with everything being so expensive, and especially while your kids are young, it's probably a little bit harder when your kids are older and there's more, they rely on their education a lot more. I know that that's not to say primary isn't important, it is, but I know it's harder with exams and stuff like that for the older kids.
So here's the thing, I think it was 40%, 4 out of 10 parents were fine with a week or more off a term for their kids. And so with what you're saying about the holiday and the airfares, are we getting too complacent? Is there a problem with us as a society not putting enough emphasis on turning up to school?
I actually am not sure about that one. I think from my perspective, I wouldn't be okay if my kids were off 1 week a term. Absolutely not. That's not. I would prefer them to go, and the only reason they've had so much time off is because they're sick. I think if you're in a privileged position to be able to take your child out and go on holiday, I think that's great. I really do think school is important, but I also see the other side where outside of school is equally as important to educate our children.
Really good to talk to you, Maria.
Thanks
is Maria Foy from Happy Mum, Happy Child. It's a website that she founded. Interested in your thoughts on this one. It is 24 after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, what's a legit reason to keep your child out of school? If you want cheaper airfares ahead of the holidays, is that okay to go a few days earlier? 40% of parents think it's fine to have a week or more off a term. What do you think? 2101 on text, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And do you give your child mental health days off school if they ask for them? It is time to go to the headlines. Ko Evi anō tēnei.
A man has been arrested after taking people hostage at a bank in central Rotorua this afternoon. Police were called to the BNZ office on Omaho Street just before 4 o'clock this afternoon after a man entered the bank. A store owner across the road says more than 15 armed police were on site and asked the stores nearby to lock up and stay inside. Another eyewitness says they saw the man come outside with his hands up. The hostages were released uninjured. Third-year student nurses at AUT feel taken advantage of as they work towards getting their qualifications. Nursing students have told RNZ they feel like they're used for free labour in an industry facing major shortages. AUT says there's considerable support available to students while on placement and student health is taken seriously by the university. The Prime Minister is accusing opposition parties of politicising the role of the Reserve Bank. The bank's governor, Adrian Orr, was reappointed for a second term this week. It's prompted fierce criticism from opposition parties who are questioning his effectiveness, given bank profits and the pressures on the economy. And a former reality TV star charged after a police officer was hit and seriously injured by a vehicle in Auckland last night has been granted name suppression to tell his whānau. The man is facing charges of wounding with intent to cause grievous bodily harm, failing to stop a motor vehicle and unlawfully taking a vehicle. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, everything seems to be moving normally on the major routes around the country. I will have news headlines and any other traffic news at 5:40.
Kia ora rā e ho. The countdown to Saturday's Rugby World Cup final is ramping up even further with confirmation today of the 23 Black Ferns who will go for glory against England at Eden Park. After a thrilling semi-final win over France, the New Zealand selectors have made just one injury change enforced to their team as they bid for a 6th World Cup crown. Here with all the latest is sports reporter Clay Wilson. You're riding up a storm, Clay. We're ready for this, aren't we?
We're getting pretty excited, aren't we?
Yeah, okay. Not broken, don't fix it. That's the deal here.
Yeah, pretty much as you mentioned, just one change, and there may not have been even that change if they didn't have to make it. Unfortunately, Liana Makaeliatu broke her thumb and she can't play, but they got a pretty good backup. We thought it was going to be Kennedy Simon who's the co-captain, but they've named Charmaine McMenamin, who's equally as experienced, probably more experienced, and that's the only change to this whole 23, and not really a surprise. I mean, it wasn't a perfect performance against France, but it was a huge effort, and the confidence those players that started that game, that played in that game, will have got from that performance, I think is enough to suggest that they didn't want to make too many changes. 6 players also in this New Zealand side that played in the 2017 World Cup final where New Zealand beat England. So those players have had that experience of beating England in a World Cup final, and experience they're going to need because this is a very big mountain to climb. World number one team, a 30-match winning streak, this English side. So these are the 23 women that are going to go out and try and do it for New Zealand on Saturday.
I know, and it's like we say no pressure, but seriously, when you present it like that, it is going to be a big occasion. So what are the players saying about the magnitude of the moment for them? Yeah, well, first World Cup in New Zealand have made the final and we've got a sold-out Eden Park. It is just huge, and who better to sum it all up than Blackfern star outside back Ruby Tui. She spoke to media today, and here is what she had to say. And she was talking about how things were when she met Kendra Coxedge, the halfback in the team, in 2010.
Imagine this. Nobody knows who the Black Ferns are. Nobody knows what they look like. Nobody follows women's rugby. We're told you will never be paid. We're told we're not giving you Eden Park for the World Cup. We'll give you somewhere that holds 5,000 because you're not going to sell it out. We're told women's rugby doesn't matter. And then here we are 12 years later. Eden Park's sold out, bro. We're at home, we're playing the best team in the world, and I'm sitting here talking to the most media I've ever talked to for the Black Ferns. Bro, it's a special moment.
Is that the quote of the year? Or is
she
that the
tells
quote
a
of the
great
year?
story, doesn't she? She's such an awesome communicator.
It's poetic. I haven't heard anything that so well put in a long time. She summed it up brilliantly. And other things to come out today that sort of underline how big it is. Apparently people who are going to go to the 660 concert in Rotorua on Saturday, on the same day, are trying to sell their tickets or swap their tickets so they can go to the rugby, which is, we know how popular 660 are in New Zealand. And speaking of music, final word to Kendra Coxedge, the halfback in the team, playing her last match for the Black Ferns in this World Cup final. She confirmed today that when it comes to music, her game day pump-up music is Celine Dion, of all people. And she did confirm that one of the 3 songs she goes to is the famous My Heart Will Go On from the Titanic. Yes. Unfortunately, I don't think we have any of that to play.
I know, because you could have mimed it out, with Kate Winslet at the front of the boat.
Could have treated the listeners to my...
Yeah, that would have been really theatrical.
Voice.
Have you got your game day outfit sorted? Because if we hadn't already taken out the French clay, I would be a little bit concerned you were repping them today in the Breton top that you're wearing. So we need to be sure what team.
These are all things you need to start considering so close to this game, isn't it?
Yeah, we'll check back in with you. Thank you, Clay. Clay Wilson, sports reporter there. An alleged dust-up over dumpster diving has raised questions about what happens to high-end fashion cast-offs. The New Zealand Herald's reported that a well-known local fashion brand has objected to a charity clothing shop digging through its rubbish skip for cast-offs to resell. We invited Moochie on the program to talk about the issue, but it declined to be interviewed, saying it was yet to verify a complaint through formal channels. Industry organisation Mindful Fashion's working towards a more sustainable sector. Its program director, Jacinta Fitzgerald, says the skip should be a last resort for clothing cast-offs.
We do know that in New Zealand, approximately 45,000 tonnes of apparel is sent to landfill every year, and that is made up of used clothing and a whole range of clothing from different sources.
That's a lot of stuff.
It's a lot of textile waste, yeah. And actually it is a bit of a problem because we know that when textiles go to landfill, they release a disproportionate amount of carbon emissions as they biodegrade. So, yeah, it's a really big problem.
So what do designers and stores do with product that doesn't sell?
So I can't speak specifically about particular cases, but what I do know at a broad level is that a lot of businesses have partnerships with charitable organisations, for example, that redistribute unsold or unusable product to people that need it, which is a really great solution. Other businesses hold sample sales and end-of-line sales. Other businesses repurpose faulty garments or garments that might not be wearable for some reason into other garments. So there's a whole range of different solutions that businesses are using to deal with textiles that others might see fit for landfill.
So you're all about sustainability. I wonder then, do you think clothing should ever go in a dumpster or to the tip, or is there always somewhere else it can go?
Oh, like 100% it should never go to landfill. That is just absolutely the last thing that should be done with it. It's a valuable resource. It needs to be used for as long as possible. It needs to be used by people, and then only then, when it is no longer usable, should we start to look at some of these other solutions around how can we capture that valuable resource and actually turn it into something else that we can use again, but it should just never go to landfill. And I really want to say at the moment, there's a lot of people that, clothing might be a luxury item. There's a lot of people that could do with some clothes. If, so the landfill or a skip is really the last place that they should be going.
How on board is the New Zealand fashion industry with this idea of sustainability? And I mean truly sustainable, not throwing away stuff that doesn't sell, not hacking up clothes that they don't want to be seen worn if they haven't sold it.
Yeah, there's a really big movement towards sustainability and more sustainable practices. We are an industry organisation. We have over 80 members now who all believe in a more sustainable future for the industry. So I would say the industry is really on board with it, but we've got a bigger problem in that we don't at a country level have a system to deal with things like textile waste. This is something that we're trying to work with the government on. There are other organisations as well doing some really good advocacy work about getting government investment in textile product stewardship systems, because we need this to be dealt with at a systemic level. It's a real problem.
So what are the potential solutions then if you're talking to the government about it?
Well, there are, definitely textile recycling technologies that can be brought to New Zealand, that can be utilised by New Zealand. That's at the very bottom of the waste hierarchy. There are also solutions that are further up around reuse, around remanufacture, around repair, around people taking better care of their clothing, and keeping it in use for longer. So there's a real range of solutions at a systems kind of level that we really need to be looking into and communicating out to everybody so everyone knows about it.
It is 25 to 6. Let us know your thoughts on that one. Do you recycle your clothes, or do you chuck ones that you don't want in the bin? Or do you on-sell them? What do you do with them? And what is the best way to make that industry more sustainable? Kia mau tunu mai, stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Ko taku hoe e nai ko Nona Peltier, who joins us in the studio to talk business. We're going to start with global logistics. This is main freight, right?
It's main freight. That's it's a big company and a bit of a darling of the market, but not so much today. And that's because,
why not?
Well, they reported a very strong first half, and is an increase of 0.2% to $217 million. So that's a big increase. Also their revenue was up to $3 billion. That's in 6 months. But the thing is, the main freight is warning that their air and oceans business is going to come under some pressure. And that's because of the economic pressure we're seeing around the world. Nevertheless, though, they're expecting to invest $700 million this year and over a little while ahead of that to improve their logistics, because they think that that the way that the market has moved with supply chain disruptions and so on has given them an opportunity to more quickly develop and grow their business. But the market wasn't thrilled by that, and so the share price fell nearly 2% today.
Property, Goodman Property Trust, it's delivered a strong underlying performance. What do they do? What are the numbers?
Yeah, so Goodman owns quite a lot of property. As a big company, they have a portfolio worth $4.9 billion. But they didn't have any gain on it this time around. So normally these kinds of companies make money on the valuation gains on their portfolio, but they didn't get one this time around. So in the absence of that, their their profit fell significantly. So they made $41.1 million in the first 6 months of this financial year, and that compares with $555 million the year before, but 505 million of that was those valuation gains. So it just really shows you how much the property sector has changed, whereas they were making like $500 million gains on their portfolio
all
just
on
a year
paper,
ago.
though.
Well, sure, but it may be just on paper, but it still goes onto the bottom line when it's a company.
Yeah.
It's unlike when you own a house, right?
Yeah. Shall we take a twirl around the markets?
Yeah. So Goodman's share price also fell at 1% today. It wasn't a great day for the market. We fell nearly 0.5%, a 52-point drop to 11,092. And we're seeing that in Asia too. There's a lot of wobbles going on right now because people are wondering what's going to happen with the U.S. Inflation data that's coming out overnight. So we're expecting it to kind of be steady. That's what the market is hoping for. And whether it does or not, we'll find out. The New Zealand dollar, it lost a bit of value, 58.8 US cents today, and steady. Actually, no, I think it was 58.4. Okay. I might have made a mistake there. 91.7 Australian, that's steady there, and 51.5 British pence. Again, no change. Now, remember, yesterday we had a overnight high of 59.99. So we're down from there. We'll see what happens tomorrow.
Thank you, Nona. Ka kite, Nona Peltier there with business news. Let's get to some of your feedback now, because there's a lot of it flooding in particular about the nurses, student nurses, and some of the challenges they're facing in study and unpaid hospital placements too. This listener says, simultaneously too important to strike, but not important enough to pay properly. Another says, I feel so sorry for nurses. They are the most undervalued yet noble workers and are absolutely essential. The sector needs to do 1,000,000 times better at supporting them. I feel so awful for them and want them to know how much we value them despite their circumstances and treatment. Another says, after 36 years as a nurse, bring back hospital-trained students, pay them to learn and acknowledge their learning. Another says, it's high time things change. Sadly, what they are experiencing is not new. When I studied physio 20 years ago, we also worked full working weeks while studying. I had to maintain a flat in Dunedin while having 2 8-week placements in Invercargill. No support with accommodation or travel, got no pay. Why do builders get paid during apprenticeships? I was almost 40 before paying off my loan. Now, a lot of you are raising the issue of trades getting on job training and saying that the fact that the same is not extended to nurses is a disgrace. Nurses required to work 1,100 hours, even at half the minimum wage. It would reduce their fee by about 8K, says a listener who's clearly done the maths. And another says, all that for 60K, which is the starting salary once they get out of training. Agree with the students. I wouldn't advise my kids to become a nurse. And another person reckons it's tantamount to slavery and the university should be ashamed of itself. Do keep your feedback coming, 2101 on text. It is 19 minutes to 6 and you're with RNZ National. Homai Ofakaro, we always love getting your feedback on anything you've heard on the program tonight. Let us know your thoughts. 2101 on text. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ and the email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Ko Evie Anor Tene, she's here with the headlines.
A man has been arrested after taking people hostage at a bank in Rotorua this afternoon. Police were called to the BNZ office on Omaho Street just before 4 p.m. this afternoon after a man entered the bank and took people hostage. A store owner says more than 15 armed police were on site and asked the stores nearby to lock up and stay inside. The hostages were released just before 5 o'clock and were uninjured. Auckland Council's Chief Financial Officer says the $270 million budgetary hole they're facing isn't unique to his city. Councillors have been in workshops this afternoon discussing how to fix a budget deficit caused by rising interest rates and inflation. Peter Gudsell says they were made aware of the situation after the release of the official cash rate report in October. A climate action campaign group says the number of delegates with links to fossil fuels at the UN Climate Summit has jumped 25% from last year. Global Witness reports more than 600 people at the COP27 talks in Egypt are linked to fossil fuels. Climate summits have always attracted significant numbers from the coal, oil and gas industries who are keen to influence the shape of the debate. And the Prime Minister will meet with the Black Ferns this evening ahead of the Women's Rugby World Cup final this weekend. Jacinda Ardern can't watch the match as she's travelling to Cambodia to attend the annual East Asia Summit. The Black Ferns will face England in the final on Saturday night at Eden Park. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, still no delays, unusually, to report on all of the major routes, although there are quite a few temporary closures on the roads around the country, so you might want to check with Waka Kotahi before you travel. I will have news and weather for you at 6 o'clock.
Ngā mihi, Evie. A battle against rate rises and service cuts. Auckland councillors have been debating how to plug a $270 million fiscal hole. Mayor Wayne Brown is determined the burden won't be passed on to ratepayers and says the council needs to find costs to cut and better efficiencies. How it does that was debated behind closed doors today, but first councillors were given an insight into where the big hole came from. Tom Taylor reports.
Welcome to the 10th of November, Te Rakawana Governing Body Extraordinary Meeting. How extraordinary.
Wayne Brown kicking off his first extraordinary meeting as Mayor of Auckland. But the meeting doesn't throw up any extraordinary suggestions about how to plug a $270 million hole in the council's budget. Councillors were given the opportunity to ask questions of Chief Financial Officer Peter Goodsell about where the massive financial shortfall has come from, before, crucially, coming up with a plan for how to fill it, and $270 million might not even be the end of it.
This $70 million fiscal hole, this doesn't factor in any potential increase in costs to the CRL, does it?
Good question.
That is correct, Councillor Henderson. At this stage, we're not aware of what any additional cost or timeframe might be for CRLL.
The meeting then went behind closed doors for a workshop on where the council can make savings. Councillor Mike Lee says there should be more transparency and public excluded meetings should only happen when confidentiality demands it.
Given the scale and the magnitude of this financial crisis, I'm uncomfortable with us dealing with it in this room, around this table, in secret.
But others were eager to get the public meeting over and done with. Councillor Lotu Fili moved to end the meeting before all councillors even had a chance to ask their questions.
We've got a lot of mahi ahead of us, lots of questions, lots of options and advice that we will get from our staff. And so, Your Worship, I would like to move that the motion be put so that we can get to that important mahi.
With no clear indication of the sorts of cuts that council could make, Checkpoint emerged from the town hall chambers to ask Auckland residents what areas could be tightened up.
It seems to be plenty of managers and not a lot of people on the ground doing the mahi, so definitely there. And in terms of time efficiencies too, some massive improvements to be made across the organisation.
I don't think selling the airport is a good idea. A short-term gain, yeah, but long-term, it clearly once a tourist build up, we're going to have a really steady income coming off that. So it's a short-sighted one, It's selling the family silver for a short-term gain.
Library doesn't really help anybody. I don't see anybody that goes to the library and buy a book. Everybody does it online,
Libraries are essential, so I don't think they should be cut.
A very big financial hole, needing some very big decisions to be made on how to fill it.
Tom Taylor reporting there. And how should the council fill the fiscal hole? Let us know your suggestions. You can text us 2101 or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And we'll speak to the council CEO, Jim Stabak, after 6 tonight. In the US, the Democrats are celebrating a midterm result that could have been much, much worse. They haven't lost control of the Senate, with results in a few states too close to call. In Pennsylvania, Democrat John Fetterman took victory in Pennsylvania over the favourite TV personality Dr. Oz. Meanwhile, the contest in Georgia is heading to a runoff in December. With more on the fallout from yesterday's vote, here's the BBC's Sarah Smith.
While the press and the pundits are predicting a giant red wave, it didn't happen. And let me say this, regardless of what the final tally in these elections show, and there's still some counting going on, I'm prepared to work with my Republican colleagues. The American people have made clear, I think, that they expect Republicans to be prepared to work with me as well.
Pennsylvania delivered the Democrats their best result in an election that was not nearly as bad as they'd feared.
Thank you, Pennsylvania. Thank you so much.
John Fetterman beating a Trump-backed celebrity candidate to turn his state from Republican red to Democratic blue.
We bet on the people of Pennsylvania, and you didn't let us down.
Without the predicted red wave, Republicans like the TV star Dr. Oz, who lost the Senate race in Pennsylvania, was one of many disappointments for his party. Donald Trump was not standing, but he still had a lot to win or lose. He's getting ready to launch another run at the White House next week. Watching some of his hand-picked candidates get knocked out was not part of this plan.
Well, I think if they win, I should get all the credit, and if they lose, I should not be blamed at all, okay? But it'll probably be just the opposite.
The Republican who really came out looking like a winner was Ron DeSantis, re-elected as governor of Florida with a hugely increased majority. We know he's thinking about running for president. He now looks well placed to challenge Trump for the Republican nomination. 2 more years, they're chanting, hoping their governor will be heading to the White House in 2024.
Thanks to the overwhelming support of the people of Florida, we not only won election, we have rewritten the political map.
Problems with voting machines in Arizona were resolved. Officials say no one lost the chance to vote, but the conspiracy theories have started already.
They say that the machines aren't working. They say that they're running out of paper in different locations throughout different states. There's a lot of bad things going on.
We had a big day today, and don't let those cheaters and crooks think anything different. Don't let them doubt. Don't let them put doubt in you.
Carrie Lake, the Trump acolyte running for governor in Arizona, doesn't know yet if she has won or lost. It could be days before we get that result, or learn who's won the crucial Senate seat in that state.
Gosh, this is close.
In Georgia, the 2 Senate candidates seem to be neck and neck. It is almost certain they'll have to compete in a fresh runoff election next month.
But when you wake up tomorrow, we will be in the majority and Nancy Pelosi will be in the minority.
A new dawn in Washington sees the Republicans almost certainly taking control of the House of Representatives. And that means they'll be able to block almost every piece of legislation President Biden proposes. Republicans may be disappointed they didn't make the gains they'd hoped for, but it appears they will have the power to frustrate the president's agenda for the next 2 years. While Democrats are celebrating a result that will most likely see them lose control of Congress. These are not the results anyone was expecting.
It is 10 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Some more of your feedback now, this time on the issue of kids out of school, and it's a polarising one, be warned. This listener says, if children are able to choose not to regularly go to school, what will their attendance be like when they enter the workforce? But another person says, in our family, we have duvet days. The adults take them when they need to too. This person does not agree. What an appalling attitude to let your kids dictate when they want to go to school. No wonder our education stats have slipped to third world. I worry about our future employers. As a registered teacher and councillor, this listener says, who has worked in schools for over 30 years, it is clear that our education system no longer meets the needs of many of our students. Trauma-informed practices are desperately needed, as it is a more flexible approach. The flip side of that coin, kids need mental health days. Harden up, drag them out of the bedroom, confiscate the phone, frog march them off to school, this person says, conditioning them to be weaklings. That one reckons. And someone else says, mental health days, unbelievable. That's what the weekend and holidays are for. And stop talking about air travel, although it is perfectly acceptable. Get on a bus or train. Stop flying. My mental health can't cope, and nor can the planet, says Jeremy. Do keep it coming. 2101 on text or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. The Reserve Bank may have avoided the worst-case economic scenarios, but admits it could have acted faster to fight inflation. The central bank has compiled a report card on its performance over the past 5 years as it fights 30-year high inflation rates. Our political reporter Annika Smith has more.
Rewind to early 2020 and the economic outlook was very bleak.
The government's warning that unemployment could climb into the double digits.
We certainly think it's going to get a lot worse.
Something we haven't seen since the early 90s.
There will be hundreds of thousands of New Zealanders who lose their jobs. Many businesses will fail.
People were braced for a spike in unemployment and a sharp fall in house prices, but neither came to pass in the early years of the pandemic. Having reviewed its actions over the past 5 years, the Reserve Bank has marked itself as having done a good job. Here's Governor Adrian Orr.
The easing in monetary policy during the COVID-19 pandemic was warranted and did head off the worst-case economic scenarios confronting us at that time.
The 122-page report found the Reserve Bank's actions have been consistent with the available data over the past 5 years, though it has found it could have been quicker to clamp down on rising inflation last year. The bank's chief economist, Paul Conway, is clear even perfect foresight couldn't have stopped the interest rates we see today.
Had monetary conditions been tighter coming through 2021, if MPC had had perfect foresight, inflation would have been marginally below where it is now. It probably would have had a 6 in front of it instead of a 7.
Finance Minister Grant Robertson says today's report makes a good guidebook for handling major crises.
I think the Reserve Bank can say that they got the big decisions right, that they knocked the sharp edges of what could have been a very difficult time for the New Zealand economy. The report also indicates some areas where, in hindsight, things could have been done differently.
The report has come under intense scrutiny even before its release today. It was put together by RBNZ staff with input from 2 international experts commissioned by the board. Nationals leader Christopher Luxon likening it to marking your own homework.
What we needed was an independent review by independent people.
One of the central bank's own former economists, Michael Riddell, says it leaves important questions unanswered.
I don't think they've really offered us compelling insight on why it is that they got things so wrong. What about their systems? What about their people? What about their models led us to this sort of outcome?
The Reserve Bank defended its review today, saying it includes a wealth of information people can use to make up their own minds if they wish. Though there may be more scrutiny on the way. Grant Robertson signalling any COVID-19 review would include economic management.
When there is a full review of our COVID response, I expect monetary and fiscal policy will be part of that review.
The Reserve Bank doesn't think an independent inquiry is necessary, but says it would welcome and fully cooperate with any that take place.
Annika Smith reporting there. Tourism leaders are grappling with the future of their industry as the impacts and disruption of climate change become more widely felt. They met in Hamilton today for the annual Tourism Summit Aotearoa, discussing climate change adaptation and innovation. Tourism reporter Tess Brunton is in Kirikiriroa.
Excited and more hopeful, tourism leaders are shaking free from the rubble of the last grim few years. Tourism Summit Aotearoa was last held in person in 2020 and the industry embraced the opportunity to catch up again, with MC Jenny May Clarkson having to resort to song to get people into their seats.
You fellas like to talk, eh? Puti puti kane hana e.
But once seated, the focus was on the challenges ahead. Tourism Industry Aotearoa's Chief Executive, Rebecca Ingram, says there is an inescapable reality for the sector.
Long-haul travellers will increasingly question the sustainability of travelling to Aotearoa, and those who do choose to come here will be more aware of their footprint.
She says it's vital that tourism operators do as much as they can to balance the flight to Aotearoa that international visitors must take. Rebecca Ingram says the realities of climate change are becoming more apparent, including the iconic West Coast glaciers retreating.
1 kilometre of retreat in the last 10 years. Yet I firmly believe we have opportunities here within these challenges. We see at TIA sustainability and regenerative being on the same spectrum. If sustainability asks, how can we make tourism better? Regenerative asks, how can we make New Zealand better?
Tourism Adaptation Roadmap co-chair Larissa Cooney says it's already been a rocky few years of extremes.
This is very real for the tourism sector. We're already facing extreme weather events which have a direct impact on our business, on the infrastructure, our asset base that we need to invest in for the future to ensure our offering is still accessible, that people can still get to us, that our product is still going to be relevant in the future.
Air New Zealand's David Morgan says pre-COVID, 60% of tourism's emissions came from aviation.
The airline goes through 138,000 litres an hour pre-COVID, and we'll be pretty much back up to that shortly.
Air New Zealand has committed to reaching a net zero carbon emissions target by 2050, using zero emissions aircraft and fleet renewal. He says sustainable aviation fuel has the potential to roughly halve their emissions.
And it's for the existing fleet. We've got a 787 that's going to arrive in 18 months' time. It's got General Electric engines on it, and it's got technology that was invented 15 years ago. We can't do anything other than put a non-fossil liquid fuel into the tanks to burn, to obviously oppose the force of gravity.
Applications for the $54 million innovation program for tourism recovery open today, aiming to support programs that are sustainable and low carbon. Tourism Minister Stuart Nash says belts have tightened since the pandemic started.
But I'm expecting some really innovative proposals to come forward. It's co-funding, got to be involved, so people have got to have a bit of skin in the game. But the conversations that I've had up and down the motor is there are some people thinking really, really big in a way that I think will play into our brand and our values, but also deliver value for those who are coming over.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says climate change adaptation is a huge focus of the fund.
The growth of the discerning consumer, the discerning tourist who wants to tread lightly in a depleted environment, who wants to offset their travel emissions, who wants to add to the natural beauty of a country and not take from it, does place upon us an imperative to provide a cleaner, greener tourism offering.
The New Zealand Tourism Awards will be announced tonight.
And that was Tess Brunton reporting from Kirikiriroa. It is time for some more of your feedback now on the subject of taking kids out of school. Meg is a teacher in Auckland at a highish decile school. She says, I can tell you straight, the kids who take the most time off, 1 week holidays included, are at the bottom of my maths, writing and reading this year. And a teacher's got in touch to say they've been teaching for 20 years. And they think a parent's job is to reassure children, not enable them. The odd mental health day, say one a term, all good. But kids need to feel the world is safe and a safe place to go to school again.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Ngā mihi o te pō. Good evening, I'm Evie Ashton. Third-year student nurses at AUT say they feel taken advantage of as they work towards getting their qualifications. Nursing students have told RNZ they feel like they're used for free labour in an industry facing major shortages. Student nurses are required to complete around 30 weeks of unpaid work over 3 years and have to cover the cost of uniforms, food, travel and parking. One nurse, Zoe, says although they have nearly graduated, they feel like they have nothing left to give.
We are students that should be excited about this new chapter of our life and embarking on, making change and helping people, which is the primary reason you get into this job, and kind of got nothing left to give.
AUT says there's considerable support available to students while on placement and their health is taken seriously by the university. A business organisation says the government could increase the labour force almost immediately by granting amnesty to visa overstayers. The head of the Employers and Manufacturers Association, Brett O'Reilly, says employers across sectors are struggling to find staff, with unemployment levels remaining close to near record lows. But he says there are thousands of people in New Zealand available to work.
There's 16,000 overstayers in New Zealand who currently can't legally work in New Zealand, so that's a labour force that we could activate. But beyond that, it really is about immigration. Could we have more flexible immigration arrangements for the Pacific Islands? We know that there are people there that are looking for jobs.
Brett O'Reilly says an arrangement similar to the one which allows less restrictive travel for New Zealanders and Australians could help solve the problem. Auckland Council's Chief Financial Officer says the $270 million budgetary hole they're facing isn't unique to his city. Councillors have been in workshops this afternoon discussing how to fix a budget deficit caused by rising interest rates and inflation. Peter Gudsell says they were made aware of the situation after the release of the official cash rate report in October. He says Auckland Council isn't alone and councils around the country are grappling with the pressures of inflation. One man has been arrested after several people were held hostage today inside a BNZ bank in a busy street in central Rotorua. Amoho Street was locked down for over an hour while armed police swarmed the area. Kirsty Frame reports.
Police were called just before 4 o'clock this afternoon after the man entered the BNZ Bank. A store owner across the road says they were alerted by armed police to lock their doors and stay inside. Police cleared people from the road and into nearby stores, and traffic was blocked for some time. Another eyewitness saw the man inside the bank typing on his phone and showing the messages to police. She says he looked agitated and nervous. She saw several women exit the bank and the man came out with his hands on his head and lay down to get arrested after. Police say there were no injuries and they remain on the scene.
The jury at a trial in Whangarei for two brothers accused of killing a 23-year-old has heard closing arguments from lawyers. Hayes Peihopa died after a street fight in central Whangarei in June last year. The prosecution says the older brother knifed the victim in the chest while the younger sibling flanked him, both knowing a stabbing would likely be fatal. The older brother's defence counsel, Stephen Lack, says his client accepts committing manslaughter but didn't plan to kill anyone in the chaotic clash. The younger brother's defence counsel, Ron Mansfield-Casey, says his client never used the knife and was simply near his brother out of loyalty. Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukrainian troops are moving carefully towards the city of Kherson after Russia announced it was withdrawing its troops. Amid suggestions it's a trap, the Ukrainian president is calling for caution. The BBC's Jeremy Bowen has more.
When we visited a mobile unit on the flatlands between Kherson and Mykolaiv, the soldiers said they wouldn't believe the Russians were leaving until they could see them go. Leaving Kherson would be a devastating defeat for Russia. It was their biggest single prize since they invaded in February. The Ukrainian soldiers we met at the front line facing Kherson this week were very confident. With or without the formal withdrawal announcement, these men believe that their flexible, fast operations and continued NATO support cannot be beaten.
Firefighters have cancelled tomorrow's strike, saying significant progress has been made with fire and emergency. Members of the Professional Firefighters Union have been holding a series of one-hour strikes, claiming lives are at risk due to low staffing levels and unsafe equipment. The union says despite progress being made with the employment, a settlement hasn't yet been reached. And the Prime Minister will meet with the Black Ferns this evening ahead of the Women's Rugby World Cup final this weekend. Jacinda Ardern is unable to watch the match as she's travelling to Cambodia to attend the annual East Asia Summit. She says she tried to change her schedule so she could go to the final.
I, for a number of years, have been inspired by them as a team and what they represent. Unfortunately, I just couldn't be in two places at once. But I am going to see them now so that I can just at least share my support and my best wishes for a really big week.
The Black Ferns will face England in the Women's World Cup final on Saturday night at Eden Park. That's the news.
On Saturday Night Requests this week, we'll celebrate the music of Chris Difford in Late Night Phil.
Back in the day, you had been part of the smart set. I worked out through the winter, the weather bright and bitter. I put away a tenner each week to make her better. Tempted, but the truth is discovered.
Late Night Phil, part of Saturday Night Requests on RNZ National.
We're on air on rnz.co.nz and on your mobile. You're back with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday for Northland, Auckland and Coromandel. Isolated showers turning to rain from late this evening with heavy falls possible. Strong easterly winds developing tonight, easing tomorrow afternoon. From Waikato to Manawatu, including Bay of Plenty in the central high country, becoming fine this afternoon. Rain developing tomorrow morning with heavy falls in Bay of Plenty. Gusty southeasterly winds easing tomorrow. For Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, showers north of Napier but cloudy periods farther south. Rain becoming widespread tomorrow morning, possibly heavy about the ranges. From Horowhenua to Wellington, also for Waded Upper. Fine today, rain developing around midday tomorrow. Marlborough and Canterbury becoming fine this afternoon. Rain spreading south from tomorrow afternoon. Nelson, Bulla, Westland and Fiordland fine today. Rain developing in Nelson and Bulla tomorrow afternoon. Otago and Southland fine, but cloudy periods mainly in the east today. And for the Chatham Islands, fine weather. The time is 7 minutes past 6. I'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Nā mihi iwi, nau mai, hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. It's calculators out for Auckland councillors who've spent a chunk of the day behind closed doors looking for $270 million to plug a budget shortfall. Among the options are asset sales, charging more for council services, borrowing more and raising rates. The blowout is $180 million higher than the $90 million previously forecast due to COVID costs, rising inflation and interest rates. The Mayor has promised operational efficiencies and relentless scrutiny of expenditure to avoid a rates rise of up to 12%. Well, joining us now is Auckland Council CEO Jim Stabak. Kia ora, Jim.
Kia ora, Lisa.
How realistic is it to expect $270 million of savings via cuts to services?
I think it would be ambitious to think we'll solve the whole problem with service changes. If I perhaps put that in context, when we did the budget last year, we signalled that there were risks in the budget for the following year, probably in the range of 90 to 150. And of course, what's happened is in the October update, inflation is higher than we had planned for, and it's going on for longer. The impact of that inflation, both in terms of our cost of interest and inflationary pressures across the board and a number of other factors, means that the budget pressure is 270, as you've said. The solution for that will come from a number of things, and we've got a number of options for councillors to consider. And today was really the start of that process.
What are the options?
Well, you outlined them a little bit in your introduction. We could use selectively, we could use debt, we could use...
How much more can you borrow, Jim?
Well, the council's got lots of capacity to borrow debt. The question will be making sure that we only borrow prudently in relation to our capital demand for next year.
Okay, so borrowing one. Other specifics, like, for example, cutting services. Have you given a plan to the councillors of what specific ones they could cut and how?
No, we haven't done that yet, Lisa. Obviously, part of the conversation we'll need to have with councillors over the coming weeks will be to what extent do we think we can deliver services differently or more efficiently to reduce the operating cost for council. So, I don't want that to sound like code. Of course, there will be some things where we think, actually, here's a service that might not matter as much to people when they're under the sort of financial circumstances that everybody's operating under. Should we think about whether that's the best service at this point in time and make a decision in relation to that? There's lots of options for councillors to consider, and that's the work that we've got to do over the next few weeks.
Okay, so you're telling us that, a forensic analysis of line-by-line expenses is not going to get the big number, 270. So is it realistic to think that some services or things will have to be cut completely in order to meet this shortfall?
It's possible that there will be opportunities to improve the cost or reduce the cost of running council by either eliminating or reducing the scope of some services. Yes, that's right.
Okay, so rates could go higher. And in documents given to the councillors, they say could go higher as long as it doesn't create an unacceptable shock for households. At what level does unacceptable shock kick in, Jim?
Well, that'll be a matter for councillors to consider. We had in the long-term plan that was prepared at the end of middle of 2021, had signalled a rates increase in the coming year of 3.5%. Now, for the average ratepayer in Auckland, that's about $100 a year. It's possible that councillors could choose for that rate increase to be higher or even lower, depending on how we choose to apply some of the other levers in order to solve the gap that we're solving for.
Would you consider a doubling of the forecast rates increase to be an unacceptable shock for households?
Well, that's not for me to form a judgment on at this point in time. We're going to provide advice to
But
councillors.
that's the terminology. That's the terminology you've used in the document that you have signed off for council. So surely you must have some thoughts on what is an unacceptable shock for households in terms of rates.
Well, I guess the circumstances we're dealing with here is inflation is roughly 7% and rates are forecast to increase by 3.5%. So clearly there's a gap that we've got to solve for, and that's part of what's contributing to the $270 million challenge. If we were
so in the scheme of things, a rates increase in line with inflation, you wouldn't consider that to be a shocking increase?
Well, a rates increase in line with inflation above what's already forecast would be another $100 per annum for the average ratepayer in Auckland. Now, it's not for me to determine at this point in time whether that would be a shock or not, but that gives you a sense of the size of the magnitude of it.
I just want to be really clear about the size of the shortfall, the $270 million, and you talked about October. When exactly was that $270 million figure made public?
It was made public in the documents that were released earlier this week, yeah.
Okay, so it became public after the election. So councillors would be seeing this, it's news to them that it's so huge.
Well, as I signalled, Lisa, we had said that we expected there to be a budget challenge in the coming year, 23-24, of somewhere between 90 and 150. We knew that, and that was public information well before the election. What's happened in October is an update to the inflation forecast going forward, and that's primarily what's driven the difference between our previous forecast and the 270.
Are you bracing for significant staff losses at the council?
Look, I think it's inevitable as we think about how we refine our services, deliver them more efficiently, reduce the cost of operating council, that would lead to some staff reductions.
So staff losses are inevitable in order to make this money up?
I think it's likely, Lisa. I have to be honest in that respect.
Are you talking tens or are you talking hundreds?
Look, I don't want to put a number on it. I think we've got some work to do before we work out, kind of how we are going to solve for the 270 challenge.
Strategic assets sales are one of the things, right? Mm-hmm. But also, if council decides to make significant changes to the rates, it's not just a simple tick box exercise, is it? What happens? What consultation is there? And how drawn out could that process be? You can't just sell off the airport without talking to somebody first, can you?
No, in fact, this whole process requires consultation with the community, and so that's something we work our way through every year. It starts with a mayoral proposal in the middle of December. And then there'll be a process for consultation with the community in the first quarter of next year, likely in February, where that proposal is laid out for everyone in Auckland to understand the implications of it.
I suppose, Jim, what I'm implying there and what I'm stating is you're running out of runway, aren't you? 15 December is the deadline for the council to have its proposal all together and in front of the councillors.
Well, 15th of December is effectively the mayoral proposal starting point, and then we build.
You've got to find $270 million by the 15th of December.
We've got to have a set of options that can close the gap on $270 million. Yeah.
Really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us. That's Jim Stabak, who is the CEO of Auckland Council. President Joe Biden has hailed yesterday's US midterm elections as a good day for democracy, while control of Congress hangs in the balance. Republicans are still favoured to win control of the House, but the situation is looking a lot better for Democrats in terms of the Senate. With at least one key race heading for a runoff, the balance of power is on a knife edge, the ABC's Rachel Mealy reports.
America's democracy has suffered some blows of late, but President Biden says the midterm elections have steadied the course.
It was a good day, I think, for democracy. And I think it was a good day for America.
Control of Congress still remains unclear, but it's likely the Republican Party will come away with a slim majority in the House of Representatives. The Senate result may not be known for some time. In Georgia, the results were so close that another election will be held in that state in a few weeks. President Biden says the American people sent a clear message.
Voters spoke clearly about their concerns about raising costs, the rising costs that they're in, and the need to get inflation down. There's still a lot of people hurting. They're very concerned. And it's about crime and public safety. And they sent a clear and unmistakable message that they want to preserve our democracy and protect the right to choose in this country.
Exit polls indicate that the number one election issue for American voters was the rising cost of living, followed by abortion rights.
But the voters were also clear that they are still frustrated. I get it. I understand it's been a really tough few years in this country for so many people.
Joe Biden says he wants to stick around for a second term as president.
My intention is that I run again, but I'm a great respecter of fate, and this is ultimately a family decision. I think everybody wants me to run, but we're going to have discussions about it. And I don't feel in any hurry one way or another to make that judgment.
But who would he come up against as the Republican nominee for president in 2024? While former President Trump says he's making a big announcement next Tuesday, another tilt at the White House is now not as clear. Some of the high-profile candidates that he backed lost their seats. Republican Governor Chris Sununu from New Hampshire doesn't like the idea.
Yeah, it's a terrible idea. I mean, it's one of the... I don't know who's advising the former president to make an announcement to run for president again next week. They should all be fired. Nobody wants to think about politics right now. Right after the election, the only thing people are going to be really focusing on, as you know, are their lawsuits in Arizona, the runoff election that's going to happen in Georgia. These are really impactful things that are going to affect stuff over the next couple of months that everyone's going to be paying attention to.
And there may be more Republicans in Donald Trump's way. In Florida, Republican Governor Ron DeSantis romped to an easy victory.
And so today, after 4 years, the people have delivered their verdict. Freedom is here to stay.
That win might see him the more obvious choice as the Republican candidate for president. Today's Murdoch-owned New York Post features a front-page picture of Ron DeSantis with a headline declaring "The future."
It is 19 after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. There was yoke on the streets of York yesterday when a man threw eggs at the King and Queen consort as they were on a walkabout. All of them missed and the man was quickly detained by police. King Charles was at a ceremony to unveil a statue of his late mother, the Queen. The BBC's Daniela Ralph has the report.
A traditional ceremonial arrival. How monarchs have been welcomed to York for centuries. But as King Charles met dignitaries, the first of the eggs was thrown. Then a second, a third just behind him, before a fourth egg lands at his feet. The King glances down, but barely reacts. As in the crowd, police officers surround a man who'd been shouting, "This country was built on the blood of slaves." His words, though, were quickly drowned out by the noisy crowd shouting back, "Shame on you," and "God save the King." A man was removed from the crowd and detained by police. The incident did not interrupt the visit as the royal party moved to York Minster, where in the heavy rain the King unveiled a statue of his mother, a poignant tribute to her 70 years on the throne.
These kind of walkabouts have marked the King's reign so far, chatting and getting close to the public. But as we've seen today, they come with risks.
My heart goes out to that person. It was a stupid thing to do, but I don't think in any way it has spoiled the day. But yes, of course, there is always a risk. But I still think it's a small one in our nation.
Today's events are unlikely to impact future royal visits from a new King and Queen who want to be seen.
Russia's ordered its troops to withdraw from the key city of Kherson, a highly prized part of Ukraine it captured early in the invasion. Ukrainian forces have been advancing slowly for weeks towards Kherson, keeping up the pressure on Russian forces. The BBC's Jeremy Bowen spent the past few days following their progress.
For days now, Ukrainian soldiers on the Kherson perimeter have been dismissing reports that the Russians were going to pull back. When we visited a mobile unit on the flatlands between Kherson and Mykolaiv, the closest Ukrainian-controlled city, the soldiers said they wouldn't believe the Russians were leaving until they could see them go. They took us on a mission to attack Russian positions. They guide their Soviet-era artillery with a commercially available drone made in China. Their command car is a 15-year-old BMW imported from Britain. It might have been a veteran of the school run. Now it's on bomb runs, passing on positions from the drone to adjust the gunner's aim. The Ukrainians claimed direct hits on positions in the large pocket of land Russians control west of the Dnipro River, which they'd have to leave if they pulled out of Kherson city. Leaving Kherson would be a devastating defeat for Russia. It was their biggest single prize since they invaded in February. In Moscow, General Sergei Surovkin, commander of Russian forces in Ukraine, made the announcement. He told a televised meeting of senior military leaders, including the defense minister, that Russia could not properly supply its troops on the west bank of the river. Ukraine's first response was to warn against premature celebrations. This week, we've been talking to Ukrainian soldiers and Kherson residents to try to gauge the mood there. You can't drive into Kherson from here because there's a front line in the way. And even if you could, the Russians don't allow independent journalists to operate there. So we have to try to piece together what's happening in a city that is, to all intents and purposes, cut off from the outside world. In Mykolaiv, I met a Ukrainian Special Forces officer who runs what he calls partisan warfare in Kherson. He didn't want to show his identity. He said harassing the occupiers doesn't just mean killing them.
The more effective it is, the worse it is for them. It makes them live in constant tension, constant fear.
The Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese will fly out of Australia tomorrow for 3 important summits in Southeast Asia, starting with ASEAN. In Cambodia, that meeting is expected to focus on the crisis in Myanmar, where the military shows little sign of agreeing to a long-term peace plan. The ABC's Mazoe Ford has more.
Myanmar hasn't been invited to the ASEAN Leaders Summit, but what's happening there will be the main topic of conversation. The country's been in turmoil since the military coup last year.
The people of Myanmar are suffering. I mean, every day we hear reports of more killings, more arbitrary detentions, more airstrikes.
Elaine Pearson is Asia Director for Human Rights Watch.
We're seeing continuing atrocities every day and war crimes being committed. And so it's time for, ASEAN governments to stop standing on the sidelines and really take action.
In the wake of the coup, ASEAN leaders and the junta chief Min Aung Hlaing came to a 5-point consensus to end the violence, start dialogue, provide humanitarian aid, appoint a special envoy and allow that envoy to meet with all sides. Myanmar's military leaders have all but ignored it.
And I must say that it's an unmitigated disaster. The humanitarian catastrophe is just alarming. The political dialogue is dead. The 5-point consensus has failed.
Charles Santiago is a Member of Parliament in Malaysia and Chair of the ASEAN Parliamentarians for Human Rights Group.
My fear is that going forward on the Myanmar question, it will actually bring about the end of ASEAN itself. Because what is the point of having a regional body when it cannot solve an immediate and an urgent problem facing the regional grouping?
Part of the problem is that ASEAN is divided. Some members want to take tougher action on Myanmar, but others don't want to interfere in what they see as a domestic problem. Sharon Seah is the coordinator of the ASEAN Studies Centre at the Isios Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore.
There's been existing fault lines already within ASEAN. And with Myanmar as an issue that's just really testing the unity of ASEAN, some of these fault lines have become even more apparent.
What do shows like The Sopranos, The Wire, Succession, Game of Thrones and White Lotus all have in common? Oh, they're all bingeable? No, apparently that's not the answer. They're all from HBO, the company which is known for regularly producing some of the highest quality dramas on TV. And it celebrated its 50th birthday this week. Journalist Hadley Freeman took the BBC's Evan Davis on a trip down memory lane.
HBO first started in the very early 1970s, but it was really the late 90s when it took off, with most obviously The Sopranos.
By the time I was a kid, I knew I'd run a family business.
What line of work are you in?
Waste management consultant.
It's a gift from Tony Soprano.
And then HBO became a real power player in terms of TV. It really proved to the mainstream American TV watcher that subscription TV is worth paying for. And that was a big revolution. So almost immediately, HBO started making proper quality drama. So things like 6 Feet Under.
I think it's really cool you live in a funeral home. It's totally weird. Casket climber.
The Wire, more recently Curb Your Enthusiasm, White Lotus, which is now on TV. Suddenly, TV was where sophisticated storytelling was happening in America.
And it's interesting because HBO, having led the way, seems to have raised the game of everybody in the US, that they show that there's a real audience for this stuff.
Absolutely. And I don't just think in the US, I'm pretty sure around the world, really. You look here, The Crown's about to start. This is a kind of open-ended, long drama. As far as I know, no set number of episodes per season. That's really something that HBO pioneered. These kind of very sophisticated, emotional dramas with lots of characters that come and go, but they come back over the course of various seasons.
Chernobyl, the drama of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, was just 4 parts of sheer television excellence.
A just world is a sane world. There was nothing sane about Chernobyl.
I mean, fully agreed there. I mean, for me, whenever I hear that HBO logo sound, I always think of Sex and the City. I know that is such a cliche for a 40-something woman to say, but that was a real revelatory show for me. And I know it's had a bad reputation since and people knock it. But when you look at the depiction of female friendship on screen in that show, it was completely revolutionary. And I have a friend who says you can always tell someone's personality by what's the theme song they associate with the sound of that HBO logo. For me, it's Sex and the City. For my husband, it's definitely Curb Your Enthusiasm. For a lot of my friends, it's The Sopranos, and I suspect now for a lot of younger people, it's Succession. Just naming those shows, and Chernobyl, of course, shows how amazing, a platform HBO has been.
Some of those tunes so distinctive. That is all we've got time for this evening. Ko te kaupapa tuatahia pōpō, and tomorrow from 5 a.m. First up, talks to rugby great Kawhina Woodman about how attitudes to women's rugby have changed as his daughter Portia prepares to play in a World Cup final. Have a great night. We'll catch you tomorrow. Friday.
RNZ News at 6:30. Kia ora, good evening, I'm Evie Ashton. Third-year student nurses at AUT feel taken advantage of as they work towards getting their qualifications. The National Party leader is open to fining parents who fail to get their kids to school. Joe Biden says Democrats are breathing a sigh of relief after not suffering massive losses in America's midterm elections. And a climate action campaign group says the number of delegates with links to fossil fuels at the UN Climate Summit has jumped 25% from last year. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7 o'clock.
Pushing back the red wave.
We jammed them up. We held the line. That's why I'll be the next U.S. Senator from Pennsylvania.
LAB makes music history.
These are the exact 4 awards